Thank you, and I am honored to be here again today. As Maria Elena said this morning, I was at the first last year at the conference, and Brad and I were on the same panel. And at that time, I talked about issues that I was much more familiar with, which was city policies and regulations. And so I want to make a qualification that I am not an economist, but I'm going to talk about some of the economic issues of green infrastructure. And what I'm hoping to do is for you who are not economists, and maybe you're engineers or planners, that you can better understand what I learned about the cost-benefit analysis. So I like to walk away from every conference with a little nugget or a little aha moment that I learned something at the conference. So last year, it was Janet Clemens. She did the economic piece, and she was talking about the Philadelphia project and their triple bottom line. And as she was talking, it occurred to me that what we were doing here in Tucson was exactly what she was talking about. So that aha moment for me was, in the world of economics and economists, when they do this kind of analysis, they have some sort of a standard. So they're all looking at the same thing. They're all sort of doing the same sort of value, but the values sort of change with each individual community. So a little background information. The year before, there was a Tucson team of 5 of us, and we went to Philadelphia. And we went because there was a workshop on adaptive water resource management and infrastructure, and it was about green infrastructure. And I went because there were 2 goals I had. One was that this LID working group that we have here in Southern Arizona, we were trying to put a big grant together, and it was a national grant. So I put this team together because one of the things that this workshop does is the teams work on a project so that when they walk away, they can implement that project in some form. So this was trying to figure out how interagency-wide we could put this grant together. The second reason why I went was I heard there was this guy named John Williams was going to be there, and he was going to be one of the resource people. And John Williams is the CEO of a company called Impact Infrastructure, and they do economic analysis for stormwater projects. And they were coming out with a program, a software, to do that economic analysis. So I wanted to meet this guy and learn more about what goes into that software and what goes into the analysis. All right, so what do we ask, right? We're always like, oh my God. We hear from the engineers and the public works people, the cost of infrastructure is going up. I was just reading, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that nationally, our roadway infrastructure is in the hundreds of billions of dollars of deferred maintenance. When I hear the Director of Transportation for Tucson talk, he says we have $850 million worth of deferred infrastructure just on roadways for the next 10 years. So we know the costs are rising. How are we going to address this? The other thing that we hear is, oh, if you put in green infrastructure, it's less expensive, less maintenance. But do we really know that? Do we know what the cost is for that green infrastructure? And is it performing correctly? So what is entailed in doing a cost-benefit analysis? Well, you can hire a consultant to do it, and depending on exactly what you want, it could cost maybe $30,000 or more, and it may just be a snapshot in time and a one-time analysis. Or for me, the sweet spot for this software was once you own the software and you know how to run it, you can do it on multiple projects, multiple times, anytime you want to do it, anytime during the design and construction of that project. So when we ask about what are we going to do, or what are we asking the cost-benefit analysis to tell us? One is that, okay, so if you have alternatives, which alternative is going to be the best alternative to take? What's the bottom line, dollar-wise. And then there's also, do the costs exceed the benefits? So that's really about revenue and expenses. So I'm saying that's really more in the private sector side, because when you're working in the public sector, your product, you're never going to sell it. The city's never going to sell the roads or the sewer system. So we never really have a revenue associated with that infrastructure in the traditional sense of revenue. But then we also want to say now is, what is the range of benefits? So in the municipal world, this is more about what's the triple bottom line? What is the social, the economical, and the environmental benefits of that infrastructure? And this is where the economists are really great, because they're starting to, if you see the metrics, they're starting to monetize that social and environmental benefits. And they have a standard. These economists across the board, if you ask any one of them to do that study, they're going to approach it somewhat in the same way. They have somewhat the same methodology and somewhat standardized metrics. So I'm saying now there's two ways to do that. You can either hire a consultant, or now there's some softwares available. EPA has a software online that you can use also. So I'm not saying that this consultant software is the only one out there. All right, so when we talk about that triple bottom line, what are we looking at? We're looking at the social, the environmental, and sort of the economic stuff. The past day, yesterday, and a little bit of today, we've heard a lot of folks in a lot of communities talk about some of these, the reduced flooding and damage, avoidance costs, the greenways, and the benefits to recreation. And this morning, Dr. Jackson talked about human health, both in the physical sense as well as the mental sense. And then, of course, the water quality, air quality, heat stress reduction, and then some of the economic stuff about, does it provide employment? Does it raise property taxes or raise property value? All right, so for Tucson, what I'm going to go over today is we're going to look at the cost-benefit analysis in terms of the triple bottom line. That's what I'm looking at right now. And then the method we used was the software. We either used AutoCase or what's called a business case evaluator. The business case evaluator is a free software, and it is an Excel spreadsheet. And then the metrics, the same metrics that all economists look at, and most important is how are they monetizing some of these, what they call externalities. The externalities are those services and commodities that never really can be priced in the open market. So you can't say, how much does clean air cost? Because you can't really price it. So those are called externalities, but the economists are figuring out somewhat how to put a value to that kind of an element. So the 4 projects we're looking at is the manual that some folks talked about yesterday, me, and I think Tom, and as well as Julia Fonseca, 2 roadway projects, and then a community garden. So one thing that's really sort of important for me that I've been working on for probably about 20 years here in this community is the concept of the urban heat island and how to reduce the urban heat island. Because here in the Southwest, it's going to get worse as climate change happens. So this is a kinetic surface temperature map for the Tucson Basin, 2005. And I cut it out, but this is at night. I think it's 7 p.m. So what you see is the temperature legend. Yellow is very hot, blue is very cool. You can see the Catalina Mountains is very cool. That goes up to 9,000 feet, so it has alpine biome. And then you can see the grid of streets in Tucson right away. You can see I-10, I-19, malls. Shopping malls are terrible, hot sinks because they have rooftops and they have a lot of asphalt parking. The airport, the tarmac, that's very hot as well. But we see here in the middle a little green spot. That's Tucson's District Regional Park, and it's green, so it's cool. And we want to put more of those little green dots around in Tucson. First case, the LID manual. There's 7 elements in it that we were sort of trying to evaluate, that we're trying to encourage other developers and even city folks, municipalities to start putting in place. I put in also that curb extension because that was one element that we asked the developers of AutoCase. So back up a little. We are the beta testing city for AutoCase. When I met John Williams at Philadelphia, they were getting to launch, but they wanted to have a city as a beta tester of their software. So we said, you know, we see a lot of studies in temperate regions and cities that have this combined sewer overflow like Philadelphia, but we don't have those sorts of elements here in Tucson. And so there's some differences in the arid Southwest that we were not seeing in economic development analysis. Would you be willing to come to our city, put some of those elements in there and make it more Southwest desert community relevant? And they said, sure, and that'll help us better understand regional differences as well. So one of the things that Meade had asked them to put in was traffic calming elements. So we started looking at some of the curb extensions as well as roundabouts. So again, we're testing, or we're doing the evaluation for the triple bottom line. And then in this case, we used the AutoCase software. I'm not going to go into the background of all of the calculations that go into this analysis. So again, there are some standard stuff that these economists do. And that aha moment for me last year, listening to Janet, was they're doing the same things that we have in this software. And then that was the beauty of the developers of this software, because they were economists. And they said, every time we do, as a consultant, we can charge the client a lot of money, but we're doing some of the same things with each report. So they decided to put it in this software and standardize some of those things that they were always doing. So when I say some values are universal, for them, and even Janet puts it in her report, that there are some values in terms of monetizing, say, the statistical life, the value of statistical life. You know, how much is your life worth? Everybody may have a different value, but there is now a standard that are regulators. So the economists look at the regulators, the EPA, the DOE, the Highway Department. What are they going to accept as that value? So it's already been vetted out. So we're using those standards. The economists are using those standards. And so those are already somewhat set, but they can change. And then the local values, we gave them reports and research, and what is the cost of water here in Tucson, and what kind of temperatures are we experiencing in the Southwest, and what kind of values do those have? So there's some localized values that make it specific to Tucson. So for me, as a planner, and looking at some of this, I'm just really more interested in the results, the back end, the final findings. That, okay, I feel comfortable that they're doing the right analysis, they're using the right data. So how do we read this for the manual? First, you can see where the zero value is. Everything to the left has a negative value, everything to the right has a positive value. We see that if you look at, oops, I went backwards. If you look at just putting concrete in, it's far to the left, and asphalt is far to the left as well. But when we start looking at the sustainable return on investment, what do we start seeing? Well, in our manual, the 3 infiltration trench, the xeriscape swell, and the water harvesting have positive values. The other 3, the bioretention, the pervious, and the cistern, which is what we also know as structural elements of green infrastructure have a little bit of a negative value. They're still much more sustainable than plain old concrete and plain old asphalt, but they're a little bit on the negative side in comparison to each other. What happens with the detention basin is it's sort of in the middle. It's neither a plus or a minus. So what's the takeaway message for me on the results of this? That if you look at the earthworks, just shaping the earth, that's going to be much more cost effective than start trying to put in the structural elements of green infrastructure. All right. Case number 2, Silver Bell Redesign. This is a real project in Tucson. It's not built yet, but the design and the construction drawings are 100% done. We were looking for real projects that had CAD drawings, right? Because what AutoCase does is you can drop those CAD drawings into the program and it will start taking the data off of the CAD drawings. So the depth of the basins, the size of the basins. So you don't have to really input those information into AutoCAD. It will extract it out of the drawing itself. So this was a real project. What we did do, though, is we added a few more things than it already had. It had some water harvesting basins, but we added more. We added some bioretention. We added more trees. And we added those traffic calming effects of a curb extension and roundabout. Again, we're looking for the triple bottom line, and we used AutoCase. So what did this show us? Again, I'm just jumping to the results, the end product of the analysis. One is that traffic calming had a number 1 effect. It's most beneficial. And a lot of that has to do with the avoidance of life, that we're not killing people on the roadway. There are accidents, less accidents. Number 2, I combined both the cost of water, the social cost of water, and the direct cost of water. The social cost is much more, again, those unmeasurable things. How much are people willing to pay to not use water, to do the conservation elements? They were able to monetize some of those effects. And then third is the energy saving and the greenhouse gas reduction, the CO2 emissions. So what we also were able to tell is who benefits from green infrastructure. And so we're looking at the stakeholders, and what we see is number 1, the community is a big beneficiary. That because of this traffic mortality reduction and the social cost of water, being that there's security in the water resources, that's a strong benefit. Number 2 is the business activity. You know, the economic activity within a community is gaining. A lot of that, again, has to do with the reduced accidents, so there's more people out there buying. And then also the social cost of water, having that security and more money to spend, and the economic activity being out there. And then 3 is the government. Okay, so we're benefiting as a public jurisdiction. It's saying that we're spending the money, your public tax dollars, in an okay way. So what you see here is the user or the target person or stakeholder is the smallest. So who is this? This is actually the driver. It's the person on the roadway, that they're not benefiting a whole lot, but the value is in the community. We're creating a great community. So it's almost what Dr. Jackson was saying this morning. We're designing something right so that the community benefits. We're not designing for the driver of that roadway, but we're designing for the community, for the pedestrian, for the bike rider, to get out there, to be able to walk in that community. So what's the takeaway message from this project? Is that the community benefits outweigh that driver on the street. that we're creating a better community. All right, project number 3, Scott Avenue. This is a project that has been implemented, and it's downtown, and it had in it bioretention basins as well as harvesting basins, lots of trees, as you see here. This project was done with the business case evaluator. So this was the free Excel spreadsheet, and there were 2 graduate students from ASU who were brave enough to try and use this Excel spreadsheet. And so they were able to do it. So what that tells me is if these students can do it, any staff person should be able to, if they just knew which values to enter into this spreadsheet, that we can do this as well. I sort of have traffic calming in italics, and I didn't realize it till I was actually putting this presentation together. When the students looked at this project, I didn't think about the traffic calming, but this roadway did have a road diet. It was reduced, and it does have some curb extensions. So what did they find? All right, number 1 is this heat stress mortality. And I have to qualify this because when the students did this project, the urban heat island calculation in the spreadsheet was not readjusted. The economist who put the spreadsheet together, it's the same economist who does AutoCAD, they put this spreadsheet together. Last year, they thought there was something funny about the research paper we gave them about the values and the avoided deaths from the urban heat island. And they had contacted the researcher, but they hadn't heard back until early this year. And the researcher acknowledged that there was a slight error in the paper. So when it gets readjusted, this heat mortality goes down a bit. But again, what we don't have in this one is the traffic calming effect. I think that'll take up some of this heat mortality portion. So then we see that air pollution is number 2, and then the CO2 emissions. So those are within the environmental aspects of the triple bottom line. And we do have the economic with the property value and not having to pay for flood damage. So let's see, what's the lesson learned from this? Let me see. So that if we add trees to green infrastructure, that they have an enormous community benefit, because that calculation goes into the heat stress mortality, the air pollution, and how trees clean the air, and the CO2 emissions, because that's part of the cleaning the air. And then there's a lot of research out there now about property values increasing if you put landscape in front of it. All right. Case number 4, the Blue Moon Community Gardens. This is not a roadway project. This is also an existing project. It's actually a project in a public housing area, and it's about cisterns and water harvesting basins. Again, we're looking at the triple bottom line, and the students from ASU did the business calculator on this also. So a little bit about this project. Tucson House is a public housing project. It's mostly seniors, elderly citizens on limited income. Some of them have mobility problems. They have no grocery stores or green space within walking distance of this area. So the city put in an application to HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Agency. They provided some money, and we created this Blue Moon Community Gardens. So this was the housing project. You see there's a parking lot, all asphalt. And then we took the asphalt out, put the community gardens in. So what did the students find out? All right. So number 1, again, is that human factor, human health factor is there again. And then the recreational value. In interviewing some of the residents of that area, they were happy that they could come out of their buildings, go into this community garden. They were having gatherings down there, as well as putting their hands in the soil. And then air pollution, the environment. So again, the economic was the property value and flood risk. We're hitting those triple bottom line values. And again, when the students were interviewing the residents, they were saying how it was relieving a lot of stress that they were able to go out. The various heights of the planters enabled people in wheelchairs to go out and also garden. And for those elderly who had problems building, the planters were a little higher up. They were happy they could go out there and get fresh fruits or vegetables. There's a small orchard, not very big, a small orchard out there. So what was the lesson learned in this project? That sometimes we need to adjust the economic analysis, because what this did not capture was what Dr. Jackson was talking about this morning, the mental health aspect and the accessibility to fresh foods. That was not in the calculation. So we need to rethink how to put that value into that calculator. So a few considerations. All right. One is we know climate change is happening. We've been told, predicted by the Institute for the Environment here on the university campus. And Greg Garfin was one of the prime editors of this assessment of climate change in the Southwest, which is part of a larger national climate change assessment, that we're getting hotter and the precipitation rates are changing. So we know that's happening. So how are we going to adapt as a city in order to address this issue? Number two is that because we're thinking about these things, that some of our standards are changing. The panel yesterday, when Brad and I talked last year, how cities are starting to relook at their standards. So that's happening now. And here in Tucson, I work also with the water department. And for them, there's two primary big buckets of water, groundwater and the river water. That's kind of questionable for us about sustainability, because that's really the Colorado River. So it's being imported, from 2,000 miles away. But how are we going to sustain our water resources? So with Tucson Water, we're now saying that we have 3 smaller buckets of water that aren't even really part of the major system. So Streets is now doing water harvesting. The city of Tucson has a commercial water harvesting ordinance, so we're asking commercial properties to also harvest water. Tucson Water gives rebates to residential property owners. So they're also being encouraged to do water harvesting on their private properties. All right, and number 3, that if we do these economic analyses, that it can be an important tool that informs us as decision makers on how and what kinds of projects to do. And how does that help us? Triple bottom line, right? Here we go. We're talking about some of the social values. We've covered some of them yesterday and today, and the analysis, that examples that I just gave from Tucson, that we know it's there. We can do it. We can put a value to it. Also, the environment. We know that we can help the environment. The environment is also a consumer of water, and we're recognizing that there's all of these networks that we need to connect together. And then the economic analysis, they were talking, Glendale, doing some life cycle costs, as well as how we start looking at the streets, infrastructure, governance. As a municipality, we have fiduciary responsibilities to the taxpayers and to the communities who are paying for these sort of services. But I will also add, in governance, part of good governance is what they talked about yesterday, that we need community participation. So we need to listen to what the community wants and how they want to develop the community. So if we can think of these things, and if we can get to that sweet spot in the middle, then maybe we can create a community that's a little bit more adaptive and resilient to the changes that are coming up. So what are the next steps for me or for us here in Tucson? We have some projects now that are going down or have been completed. Tom talked about downtown links. I'd like to, and I was hoping I could finish the economic analysis for downtown links, but I didn't get it into the program to run the analysis, but that's something that I still want to do. Houghton Road also has some green infrastructure in it. It's one of the newer projects that's been completed in Tucson. So the other part, I'm going to come back to Philadelphia. What the Philadelphia economic analysis did was they were comparing alternatives. They went from all gray to all green and all the variations and permutations in between. And they were evaluating all those permutations to figure out which one is going to be the most bang for your bucks. And they selected one, and they're carrying it out now. And the other thing that I will say, maybe I need to make friends with more bankers because I don't understand what green bonds are. But the economists that worked with us in AutoCase, they said, if you're able to do an economic analysis and you can show that your community is investing in responsible infrastructure, that there are corporations and institutions that are willing to invest in green bonds. And part of that is those institutions want to put on their table of investments that they have some responsible investments happening. So I don't understand exactly how that works, but I think that's part of why we need to figure out how to do these cost-benefit analysis for our infrastructure projects. All right. So this project and many of these projects could never have been completed without our partners, Meade, PAG, Evan Canfield, Pima County, Sandy's out here too from Pima County. They were all very collaborative. So we're still collaborating. We're still trying to figure out some of this green infrastructure. How can we make it better, stronger, and do more in the community? I learned a lot from the economists at Impact Infrastructure, John Williams and John Parker, Ryan Myers. They were great to talk to. They helped me understand better what the economics was saying and how to monetize those things that we always, and I heard it yesterday too, how do you monetize these values that we know are intuitively important, but we need to show our taxpayers and the funders that it's important, and we can make more social responsible design standards. EPA helped us with the manual, Tetra Tech was their consultant, and then the students at ASU. If you want to know more information, some sites, the LID working group at Pima County, the AutoCase, all of this cost-benefit analysis is on that page as well. And Impact Infrastructure has a lot of information about economic stuff. And that's it. Uh-oh.